has the courage to tell the truth. And for that, she should be richly rewarded. It's amazing to me that she is not being 100% embraced by her political party. That is inconceivable to me. But so it is my privilege to introduce her tonight. Fairfield, Iowa has a rich tradition of peace. It's not a coincidence that we're here tonight. Before the Westerners came, the settlers came, this land was known as the Chautauqua, and we have a park named after that. It was a meeting ground for tribes to come together and be in peace. Probably over 120 years ago, Parsons College got established, very venerable college. And in that college, during the Vietnam War era, this land, this town was a refuge for people to not have to fight in that horrendous war that we were lied to get involved in. Subsequently, it was acquired by a great man who devoted his university to peace, inner peace and peace for the world. So we are triply blessed to be here tonight. And it's astonishing to me, I saw this young man standing back there, and oh my God, I need to take his picture. So I went up there and took his picture, and he's with the press. He just happens to be here with the press. I said, well, what is your name? He goes, well, my name is Phoenix. And then he tells me that the name of his blog is Phoenix Rising in America. Say hi, Phoenix.
Hello, Iowa.
So obviously the reason why we're doing all this work and this generation that's here is for the young generation so that they can have a world of peace. And as Tulsi approaches, I would like Phoenix to give her the flowers in the tradition of Fairfield. And give her our love and support. She is a light among lights. It is obvious to anyone who's ever seen her. She is a blessing to our nation. Thank you for coming.
Appreciate it. Thank you.
And this is from Phoenix.
Wow. These are beautiful, Phoenix. Thank you very much. Can I get a hug? Can I get a hug with the flowers? All right. Thank you. Wow. Aloha. These are beautiful. Thank you very much, Ed, for all of your support, for hosting us all here tonight, and thank you for your kind introduction. Can we give Ed a round of applause, please? Thank you. I want to recognize a few other folks here. Can we give Abby, our wonderful singer and musician, our thanks for sharing her heart and love and art with us? And is there anyone here from the Jefferson County Democrats? Yeah? Well, I want to say thanks. Jefferson County Democrats helped to push out the word, as did so many of you. And of course, last but not least, thanks to all of you for making the time to come out this evening. It's so good to be back here in Fairfield. I saw a couple of you as you came in. We've met before, either the first or the second time that we've been here, or in other places across Iowa, and we're just grateful to be able to have this time to really travel across your state, stop in some of the bigger cities and the smaller towns, and really just listen and to hear from people. And as I shared with a reporter, we just came from South Carolina, I shared with a reporter just how stark the difference is between the kind of culture and atmosphere in Washington versus what we experience when we're out on the road visiting all different parts of our country. And it's really inspiring. It gives me hope about our future, because everywhere we go, there are people who are just like you, bringing their own experiences and backgrounds and different stories, but all coming together, recognizing that united we stand, divided we fall, that we have great work before us that must be done. And in order to bring about the kind of change we need to see, in order to be the change we wish to see, that requires all of us coming together. This is why, for those of you who have ever seen me in person or watched a video or seen one of our town halls live streaming, what's the first thing I always say? Aloha. I'm consistent, and there's a reason for that. And it's not because aloha means hello. It doesn't, actually. It's often used as the greeting of the day for a very important reason. Because when I greet you with aloha, when we greet each other with aloha, really what we're saying is, I come to you with respect. And I come to you with an open heart and with love and with care and a recognition that we are all God's children, that we are all connected. We are all brothers and sisters. And when we begin our conversations in this way, when we begin our interactions and connections in this way, it inspires us to be able to see past and go beyond all of the different things that we see, especially in this age of divisiveness, these things that are so often used to tear us apart, things that make us unique, the color of our skin, where we come from, who we love, how we choose to worship, if we choose to worship, all of the different things that make each of us unique. Aloha inspires us to see each other for who we really are and to see that we are all brothers and sisters. And then by doing so, we can stand together, we can join hands together to take action for the care and well-being of our brothers and sisters and our home, our planet. This is the answer to the extreme divisiveness and the hyper-partisanship that is tearing our country apart. This is the answer. This is not just what we in Hawaii believe. Obviously, I'm biased growing up there, but look, I come from the most diverse state in the nation. We have a majority of minorities, so much that the term minority doesn't mean a whole lot in Hawaii. The most diverse state in the nation, not only by race and ethnicity, but by religion and different cultures, different backgrounds. And you would think that in some atmospheres, that might be a recipe for conflict. But in Hawaii, it's not. And it is because of this culture and this spirit of aloha that whether we are Native Hawaiian or not, we grow up surrounded by and embracing and being inspired by this culture. There's something I want to share with you, because Dr. Martin Luther King, when he first visited Hawaii in 1959, this is something that not a lot of people know about, but he came and visited Hawaii, and he was so inspired by the people who he met and the experience that he had, which really was the experience of aloha, that when he spoke to our state legislature at that time, I want to share his words. He said, "We look to you for inspiration and as a noble example, where you have already accomplished in the area of racial harmony and racial justice what we are struggling to accomplish in other sections of the country. And you can never know what it means to those of us caught for the moment in the tragic and often dark midnight of man's inhumanity to man, to come to a place where we see the glowing daybreak of freedom and dignity and racial justice." When he came back to the mainland, he left Hawaii and returned to the mainland, he was sharing his experiences with other people, and he said of his visit to Hawaii, quote, "As I looked at all of these various faces and various colors mingled together like the waters of the sea, I could see only one face, the face of the future. We are that future. His call to action is to us. The faces that he saw, those are our faces. And he recognized how important it is back then as it is now that we appreciate this connection that we have, that we are all God's children, that we are all Americans, and that we are strongest when we stand united. When you think about the challenges that lie before us, the strength that comes from our unity is rooted in our commitment to the proposition that our country was founded upon, this proposition of ensuring equality and justice for all. We are far from achieving that today. We have a lot of work to do as we strive towards that more perfect union, but we can never begin to achieve that unless we begin on this foundation of unity. And this is a question I get asked most often, is how do we overcome the differences? How do we overcome these great divides? How do we make sure that our leaders are coming together to actually pass legislation that serves the interests of the people, rather than seeing this battle between powerful leaders and two powerful political parties who are only looking at each other and saying it's us versus them, rather than saying, hey, what about the people? What about the people who send us to these positions of power and authority, not for it to be abused, but to serve the people? Let's get back to our roots, get back to our foundation. There's a reason why at every single one of our town hall meetings, you might have seen as you came in, we have copies of the Constitution and the Bill of Rights. People forget sometimes where we have come from as a country. Forget the vision that our founders had for us. Forget what it is that unites us as Americans. And I think it's important for us to remember that, to remember how important these freedoms and civil liberties are, to remember what is actually in the Bill of Rights. And when we look at what unites us all as Americans, we think about, yes, we love our country. We love and care for each other. And therefore, we will do what is necessary to build this better and brighter future for each other, for our fellow Americans. When you think about patriotism, what could be more patriotic than to fight for the well-being of our brothers and sisters? What could be more patriotic than to ensure that the policies we have in our government protect our people and protect our planet, our home? What could be more patriotic than standing together to get rid of the government of, by, and for the rich and powerful that exists, and instead replace it with a government of, by, and for the people? This is real patriotism, rooted in those founding documents, rooted in that vision that Abraham Lincoln laid out for us when he delivered that Gettysburg Address, recognizing that we, the American people, deserve a president who will put people ahead of profits, who will put people ahead of the hyper-partisan politics that are tearing us apart, that'll put the well-being of our people and our planet at the forefront of the decisions and the policies that are being passed by our government. These are the kinds of changes that we're seeking to bring about. And I can tell you that as your president, let's start with healthcare. As your president, I will crack down on the crony capitalism being pushed forward by big pharma and big insurance companies who are literally profiting off the backs of sick people in this country, making sure that as we bring about the changes and reforms in our healthcare policy that will ensure every single one of our brothers and sisters gets the quality healthcare that they need, when they need it, where they need it, regardless of how little they may have in their pocket, regardless of pre-existing conditions, regardless of the seriousness of the illness that they may be facing. Big insurance and big pharma have no seat at our table as we build this policy, as we ensure that our health care serves the interest of our people. As your president, I'll make education a priority. Someone told me the other day, a political pundit said, voters are not motivated by education as an issue to vote. But really, when you think about it, when you think about our kids, we talk about our kids are our future. They are our future. We look to the next generation. Why aren't they getting involved more in politics? Why aren't they doing more? Why don't they care more? Why aren't they more informed? Why are they not best equipped to be competitive in the global economy? Well, it gets back to education. It gets back to making sure that our teachers are paid what they deserve and that they've got the tools necessary to teach our kids, provide them with that quality education. We've got to listen to our teachers. My parents are teachers by training. My aunt, we just came from South Carolina. She was a teacher in public schools there for almost 40 years. And I hear this frustration from teachers all the time saying, gosh, if only Washington would listen to us and hear about what goes on in our classrooms, to hear about both the challenges as well as the incredible opportunities with young people who have these amazing talents, if only we can help empower them. Too often what we see is education policy that is written and driven with a heavy hand at the very highest levels of our government, and by the time it trickles down into the classroom, you end up with something that is driving test scores or statistics or things that you have to report on up the chain of command, but the kids and the quality of the education actually gets lost in the process. Listening to our teachers, providing them with the tools they need to serve our kids. This is what we must do. We're hearing more and more these days about the continued generational impact of the failed war on drugs. How many families, how many people have been lost as victims to this failed war on drugs? As president, I will end the federal prohibition on marijuana, end this failed war on drugs, and actually hold people like Big Pharma, Purdue Pharma, the perpetrators of this opioid epidemic, accountable for the disastrous consequence they've waged on our society. It is sickening when you really think about how our laws will currently throw somebody in jail, giving them a criminal record for a minor marijuana violation. But you've got the owners and executives and the Sackler family who have made billions of dollars from Purdue Pharma. Not by running an above-the-line business, they have cheated and lied their way into proliferating these highly addictive drugs into our communities and on our streets across our country and around the world. And now that more states are starting to file lawsuits against them for the things that they have done, what's their response? This is the rich and powerful response. Let me take the money and go park it in a trust fund somewhere where it can't be touched by these states and judges who are actually ruling on the side of the people and against Big Pharma. They'll go park their money somewhere else, as the Sackler family has been doing. And then what's the next step? Bankruptcy. File for bankruptcy, because once that happens, then nothing else can be touched. But meanwhile, if you have someone who has been arrested or charged with a minor marijuana violation, for example, and they're poor, they don't have that much money, and they're in a state that allows for a cash bail system, they can't afford to pay bail, so they'll sit in a jail or in a local prison until their ticket is called and they can begin to work their way through our criminal justice system, meanwhile losing their job, leaving their kids or their family behind, or missing classes at school, leaving themselves in a situation where even before they have been convicted of any crime, they have already been punished. Why? Because they're poor. We've got to get rid of this government of, by, and for the rich and powerful that rewards the rich and powerful and that punishes the poor and that leaves the rest of us behind. And we can do this. We can do this by ending the failed war on drugs, by getting rid of this cash bail system, by actually reinstating this ban on for-profit private prisons. Bringing about the changes that we need in sentencing reform and prison reform by making it so that those who are dealing with substance abuse or addiction, that they're not getting caught in this revolving door in our criminal justice system, but are actually being diverted towards getting the help that they need, getting the treatment that they need, not making it a criminal offense to be addicted to drugs. Those who are in need of mental health services. We hear this from people who work in our prisons all the time. People get arrested, really, when you look back at what's the root cause of what's really going on, they actually are in need of mental health treatment. Now, we see some of this beginning to, so if there are programs that are beginning to help with this kind of thing with, family court, you've got drug court, now there's a veterans court. But we can't do this in a piecemeal approach, dependent on whether or not there's enough funding going to these programs to actually help people. We have to recognize the priority that this is, both for the well-being of our people and society, but also on the fiscal cost that it has to all of us. Where it costs more to imprison someone than it does to actually get them the help that they need and prevent them from being thrown behind bars in the first place. We've got to tackle the environmental threats that we face. Climate change. I had a conversation with a gentleman earlier today on our way driving here who's conservative, and bringing up the topic of climate change, it was something he felt very passionately about, but maybe not in the way you might think or hope. He's one of those people, he called himself a climate skeptic. And I listened to him and I asked him, well, do you think that, can we at least agree on the reality that the choices that we make in our individual lives and the policies we have in our government contribute to these environmental threats that we face? And he said, only this much. So we kept talking, and eventually we got to the point where I said, okay, well, let's just talk about clean water. Let's talk about clean air, soil quality, and conservation. And guess what he said? He said, I really am a conservationist at heart. And that his father, he came from a family of farmers, that his father and grandfather, that they were really focused on soil quality and ensuring that they were protecting the quality of the soil that they were farming. So, I told him, I said, well, we're going to agree to disagree on some of these other things, but this is a place where we can start. And that is what is so important as we look to the challenges and the environmental threats that are before us. Rather than starting and stopping at the point where you are either in the climate change activist tribe or you are in the climate skeptic and denier tribe, and rather than actually working together to solve the problem, what you see is both sides are just screaming and yelling at each other. Where does that leave us? Nowhere. It leaves us without the kind of progress that we really need. It leaves us without the kinds of changes that we need to see. So just as I had that conversation earlier today, this is where we can and we must find common ground as a country to be able to bring about the big policy changes that we need to make here at home that really break down to preserving and protecting our home and these basic necessities that every single one of us has. Clean water to drink, clean air to breathe, a safe place to be able to call home, not only for us, but our kids and their kids and their kids to come. We may have differences in how to get there, who have different ideas, and there's a lot of strong arguments that you can make. But by starting on that common ground, then we're having the dialogue that's necessary to ultimately ensure that we are transitioning off of fossil fuels and making the kinds of investments in clean, renewable energy that we need to see. Ending the nearly $30 billion in subsidies that we are still giving to fossil fuel corporations now, and instead turning them towards real solutions that are sustainable and that will serve us for a long time to come. Not only is this the right thing to do, the economic argument is more and more going in our favor as consumers to say, hey, it is more expensive actually to look to fossil fuels than it is to look to clean renewable energy. So we're taking away the counter arguments one by one that have stood in the way of progress for so long. And again, we can do this by having this dialogue, by having this conversation to bring about the kind of changes we need to see in agriculture. Too often when you hear climate change debates or forums, a lot of times they're not bringing up agriculture and how these outdated and archaic farming practices are actually contributing more to our carbon, more pollution to our air, poisoning both our water and our waterways. It's not that we just say, well, you can't do it anymore. No, we need farmers. We need people to grow food for us to eat. How about let's incentivize and empower them with information to be able to farm in ways that are sustainable, regenerative farming, things that will actually help provide a positive impact to our environment. There is so much that we can and must do to be able to protect our environment here at home. It will still not even come close to what the planet needs to see in this change. This is why, as president, one of many reasons why I will lead with a foreign policy based on cooperation rather than conflict, making it so that we can negotiate our differences with other nations without resorting to war, while leaving the space open to be able to cooperate and work together on areas of shared interest, like climate change. We've got to work with countries like China, like Russia, like India, other countries in the world in order to take a coordinated global approach to solving the challenges we face. Yes, getting back into the Paris Climate Accords as the first step, but that is the first of many steps that we need to take, recognizing that even when that agreement was signed, the signers recognized it didn't even come close to making the kind of change that we need to see. There's many more issues that I know we'll get to discuss in our Q&A. I want to close on something that is near and dear to my heart, but that is existential to all of us. There is an existential threat that we face, and we in Hawaii had a major wake-up call as to what that threat is last year in Hawaii. And this threat is the nuclear threat. Now, you won't hear it talked about a lot on the news, but the reality is that we have entered a new Cold War. How's that possible? What does that mean? How many of you were around and remember the duck and cover days of the last Cold War? Well, the situation that our leaders have brought us to today is the reality that because of escalating tensions between the United States and other nuclear-armed countries like Russia and China and North Korea, nuclear strategists are talking about how we face a greater risk of nuclear catastrophe now than ever before. What we experienced in Hawaii, and so I'm not old enough to have been around for the last Cold War, and this whole concept was something that might be a little bit difficult for our generation to wrap our heads around, but trust me, we had a huge wake up in Hawaii about how serious this threat is. When early on a Saturday morning, around 8 o'clock or so, our civil defense put out a warning to send a text message to over 1 million cell phones all across our state, blasted a message. It was all over the radio, all over television stations, and this message said, "Missile inbound to Hawaii, seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill." Seek immediate shelter. This is not a drill. I want to ask you to just pause for a moment and think about what you would do if we got that message here today. Knowing that you have just 15 minutes. 15 minutes. Seek immediate shelter. Raise your hand if you know exactly where you would find shelter from an incoming nuclear missile. Where would you go? Underground? Underground? How about you, sir? I like your answer. Someone else said they would go to the liquor store. I like your answer better. In all seriousness, though, no, you're right. I mean, look, even if you had an underground bunker built, we're not just talking about being able to survive the nuclear blast. You're talking about the nuclear fallout that would come after, the nuclear winter that would come after. So what you're really talking about is a nuclear bunker deep enough to survive the blast, that you could stay in long enough with enough food and water and supplies for who knows how long, an extended period of time, not just days or weeks, but months. Years. Exactly. Who has this? This is what was running through the minds of so many of our loved ones, families, and people all across Hawaii when we got that message. Where do you go? What do you do? We had college kids who were sprinting across the campus. They had the surveillance cameras on the walkways. They were sprinting across our campus looking for some kind of shelter somewhere, but not really knowing where they were running to. There's a father who lowered his little girl down a manhole, thinking that that may be the only place, that at least she might survive. But this is what we were confronted with, is this big hoax that with, this fancy civil defense warning system, our leaders have failed us because they've brought us to this point where these threats have continually increased. We still have an incredibly high number of missiles that the United States and Russia have pointed at each other on hair trigger alert, could be launched within minutes. We do not have a no first use policy, neither does Russia, which means that if one of our two countries even thinks that an attack may be coming, they may launch a preemptive attack, sparking a nuclear war that destroys our planet. So they've brought us to this point. We're in a new Cold War. We face this existential threat. We've got a fancy alert system that lets us know, hey, missile incoming, seek immediate shelter, but hey, guess what? Nope, there is no shelter. There is no place to go. There is no place for you and your children and your loved ones to be safe. This experience that we went through in Hawaii was a major driving motivation for me to run for president. Because I knew that it does not have to be this way. It doesn't have to be this way. And I wanted to do all that I could. I want to do all that I can to ensure that none of you, none of your children, none of your parents, your loved ones have to go through what we went through. That none of you, no one in this country has to live in fear that at any moment an attack could come and you would be faced with that decision of what will I do with the last 15 minutes of my life? Who will I spend it with? Where will I go? As president, the very first thing that I will do is to call for a summit between the United States, Russia, and China to begin to work to end this new Cold War, de-escalate these tensions, begin to renegotiate many of the treaties that we have seen eroded or completely thrown in the trash, treaties that were negotiated decades ago by leaders, our presidents from both political parties, who recognized how serious this threat is and how important it is that we work with leaders of other countries, even those who we may have serious disagreements with, to begin to reduce the numbers of nuclear weapons we have in the world, to stop this proliferation of nuclear weapons, to be able to work towards that future where no one on this planet has to live in fear of a nuclear war and catastrophe. Now, the cost of war is real. This is something that, as a veteran, I know and can understand in a deeply personal way. You know, I served in Iraq in 2005, where we saw the terribly high human cost of war, both in our friends who were killed in combat, as well as in those who came home with us, but who endured both visible and invisible wounds. The cost of war that is not often realized and is almost never talked about, both by the media or politicians, is the one that is paid for by every single one of us. Every single one of us. Maybe you've never thought about it yourself, but the cost of war that results in the reality that, as you know, you think about the things that concern you, maybe the issues that are top of mind for you, whether it's healthcare, the need for us to invest in infrastructure, education, the kinds of resources we need to dedicate to protecting our environment. And every single time it feels like our politicians tell us, well, you know, there's just not enough money. I don't know how we're going to pay for these things. We can put a little bit towards it, but it's never near enough to serve the needs of our people, to solve the problems that we are facing. They don't tell you why. They don't tell you where our taxpayer dollars are going. They don't tell you, well, actually, we can't afford to serve the needs of our people because we're continuing to spend trillions of our taxpayer dollars on waging counterproductive regime change wars, being the world's police, going around the world and overthrowing authoritarian dictators that we don't like, leaving the ones that we like in power if they serve the interests of one corporation or another, as the military-industrial complex profits off of these continued regime change wars without a thought for the cost that it has on every one of us as Americans, the cost and the price that is paid for by every one of our servicemen and women, and the cost that is paid for by the people in the countries where we wage these wars. This is something, this foreign policy has been perpetuated across both Democrat administrations. And it's resulted in the great loss and the great cost that we all experience today. Now, Ed, you mentioned in your opening remarks about how you don't know why the whole Democratic Party isn't clamoring around this message I'm delivering about ending these wasteful regime change wars, working to end this new Cold War and arms race. Why is that? Lobbyists, money, military-industrial complex, foreign policy establishment, both parties have unfortunately become the war parties. Both parties have unfortunately become subservient to the interests of and the influence of the thing that President Eisenhower warned us about in his farewell speech. He could have spoken about anything. This is his last words. He is speaking to our country. He could speak to his legacy or any one of a number of things. But what's the one thing he warned about? The military-industrial complex. Can anyone remember a farewell speech by any other president? Okay, fair enough. Fair enough. But I think it's significant that he chose his last words to raise this warning to us all. And here, as we sit here tonight, we can understand why. This is why who you choose to serve as your president and commander-in-chief is so critical. The most important responsibility the president has is to serve as commander-in-chief. The decisions that are made there impact us in every single aspect of our lives. Our foreign policy is central to every single other issue that we care about and are passionate about, and impacts us every day in our lives. I'm bringing the experience and the understanding that comes from serving in Congress for nearly 7 years, serving on the Foreign Affairs Committee, the Armed Services Committee, Homeland Security Committee, understanding the importance of our national security and the cost of war, and the experience that I have serving as a soldier, for serving over 16 years, deploying twice to the Middle East, bringing these experiences, the understanding that come from them, and most importantly, the conviction of what we must do to bring about this sea change in our foreign policy, that make me ready to be able to walk in on day one to serve you as your commander-in-chief, to bring about an end to these wasteful, counterproductive wars, to work to end this new Cold War and arms race, and to redirect our precious taxpayer dollars towards actually serving the needs of our people right here at home. I need your help to do it. We know that the challenges before us are great. We know that these influences, the establishment is very powerful and very strong. They have a lot of vested interests in maintaining the status quo. It's why we are already seeing efforts to smear and undermine our campaign and try to discredit what I'm saying, because they cannot answer the truth that we are speaking. They're afraid of the truth. The challenges and the obstacles are great. It requires every single one of us to stand up and make sure that our voices are heard, to bend this arc of history away from war and towards a future that ensures equality and justice for all, that provides opportunity and prosperity and peace for every single American. So I want to close just by asking you for your help, asking you for your support. Our campaign doesn't take any contributions from PACs or lobbyists. We are fueled by people all across this country who are either giving their time, their energy, or their resources in whatever way possible to deliver our message to as many people as possible. And what we're finding as more and more people hear this message, we have Democrats, Republicans, independents, libertarians coming together and uniting around our message of service above self. Those are the values and principles that I seek to bring to the White House, to restore honor and integrity and respect, to make sure that our White House can once again be that beacon of light and hope and opportunity for every single person. Thank you so much, everyone, for being here. It's so great to see you. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart. We'll open it up. I would love to hear what's on your mind. We'll get to as many questions as we can. Yes, sir. Let's start with you. Yep. She's going to bring a microphone for you. Make sure everybody can hear you. Gotcha.
So your last statement's sort of a good intro for me, because unlike most of the people here, I'm not a Democrat. I am a libertarian. One of the things that brought me towards your candidacy, or the three things that brought me towards your candidacy, were criminal justice reform, your foreign policy, and then privacy, which you mentioned. One of the things I see or have read a lot about is that I'm scared could eventually come to America is China's social credit program that they're slowly rolling out, where what you do in your regular life, their surveillance state has gotten so big that what they do in their regular life affects their credit score, whether their jobs, things like that. And last week, our good friend, Attorney General William Barr, met with Facebook about a backdoor encryption or a backdoor into their encrypted WhatsApp program. So I'd love to hear more about how you try to combat that as president. Thank you.
Thank you. I share your concern about a lot of these different issues related to our privacy, our Fourth Amendment rights in this country. And that's, once again, when we talk about the Constitution, we're not just talking about something that is untouchable. You know, what we're really talking about are rights that we see are under attack from different directions, including from some parts of our own government. When you look at some of the provisions that were included in the Patriot Act, really what they provided were wide open doors for agencies within our own intelligence community and our own government to violate our Fourth Amendment rights, invading our privacy, gathering information about our phone calls or looking into our emails without a warrant, which is what is required in this country. So I've been working in Congress now for years to be able to try to close a lot of these loopholes. Section 215 of the Patriot Act is one of those provisions that open those doors. It's expiring at the end of this year, so we are calling on the administration and our colleagues in Congress not to renew it. There are other provisions in there that as different sections of the Patriot Act are coming up, we're seeking to either fix or reform it or let them expire. Looking at reforms to the FISA Court, once again, to make sure. How many of you know about the FISA Court? Wow, a lot of you. So this is a secret court that is classified, and even as a member of Congress, I don't get access to the cases that are brought to these judges in the FISA Court. This judge, these different rotation of judges who are assigned to the FISA Court really are the ones who make the decisions to allow the government to go and spy on and surveil Americans, basically. Here's the thing, though. When you all might not know this, but there is no public advocate in that court. So in a judge, usually you have the plaintiff and the defendant, right? In the FISA Court, all the judge hears is the case that's brought forward by the government. It's true. There's no civil liberties advocate. There's no public advocate. There is no one saying, all right, hold on a second here. Let's take a look at what you're asking. Is it in the best interest of the public, and does it violate our Fourth Amendment rights? That's a very simple change. We have legislation that we're putting in to fix that, to make sure that we have a civil liberties advocate that's in the courtroom every single time the government brings one of these requests forward. And you see how important this is when you actually look at the statistics of how often a judge rejects a case brought forward by the government. Now the government will say, well, you know, it's because we go back and forth with them beforehand, they ask questions, we answer them, we fix it, we do these things before they make their final decision. But it doesn't negate the fact that we have already seen abuses to our privacy and civil liberties, and we must make sure that we reform this process. This is a huge topic. I'll close on big tech, on Facebook and Google, these two massive big tech monopolies. Who did I see when I walked in who brought up Google? There, in the back. You see how much power these two big tech monopolies have over almost every aspect of our lives, especially now that we know Facebook owns WhatsApp and Instagram. You can see kind of the dangers there if Zuckerberg has this meeting and he actually agrees to some, I don't know what happened with the conversation, so I'm not going to comment on it, but you can see where this leads when you have so much power in the hands of a few individuals who have access to so much of our private information. And not only that, but how they can influence the information that we are seeing and that we are getting. You know, where they're canceling accounts. You know, Google has canceled, they've said themselves, they've canceled YouTube accounts even though those accounts were in compliance with their terms of use. Why? Was it because they didn't like the content that was being put forward? What was the reason for that? There's concern about First Amendment rights being limited, certain voices being sequestered because, I don't know. It's a blank, you know, who knows? But you know, what is close to 80% of Americans use Google as a search engine. We experienced the consequences of this power after my first debate. We hoped going into that debate I would be the most searched candidate of the night. I was. And we had planned for that by, you know, getting our ads pre-approved. We had the ads so that people who were searching, hey, I've never heard of Tulsi Gabbard, who is she? They type that into Google, and then hopefully they see one of my videos or one of the messages I've put forward. They go to my website. That's the whole point here, right? Well, somehow at that peak of when most people in this country were searching for my name, our Google Ads account was suspended. And we were not given any kind of notification. Like, we just noticed our ads were not popping up. And so our tech team started reaching out to Google saying, hey, what's going on here? Just tell us what we need to do to fix this, to get our account back up and running again as quickly as possible. We never got a response for a long period of time. Once we started to get once we got a response, it was very unclear and provided no direction to say, here's what you did wrong, here's what you got to do to fix it. That didn't happen. They got different responses from different people. None of them made sense. None of them jived with one another. And then all of a sudden, after this peak search period had passed, our account was reinstated. And with no notice or message from Google to say, hey, sorry we made a mistake, or we realized that our concern about this really didn't matter, so we've like nothing. No explanation from Google whatsoever. So as you pointed out, sir, when I talked to you and we walked in, we filed a lawsuit against Google because of this. Because when you look at the power that they have, if they can do this to us, as a sitting member of Congress, I'm running for the highest office in the land, what can they do to anyone else? Whatever they want. So yes, I believe we've got to break up these big tech monopolies, subject them to the antitrust laws that we subject to other sectors in our government, and provide some kind of oversight to make sure that our civil liberties, our private information is not being used or abused or commercialized without our express approval, and to make sure that these kinds of backdoors are not being built into these systems, again, without our knowing about it. Thank you. Yes, sir.
I just wanted to make a quick comment.
Yes.
I'm a conservative, and I have to say that, in my opinion, you sound much more like a conservative than any Democrat that I've ever heard.
Thank you, sir. You know, a reporter in New Hampshire told me something similar to that one day when she was asking me questions about my policies, and she said, gosh, you know, Tulsi, you sound like a conservative. And I said, what do you mean? She said, well, you know, you're talking about like how you pay for things. You're talking about ending, you know, these regime change wars, this new Cold War and arms race, and actually using those dollars to serve people here at home. And I like laughed out loud, literally LOL'd. I said, since when is this idea of fiscal responsibility and getting our priorities straight as a country, getting out of these stupid wars, a conservative idea? This is a unifying principle that no political party owns, no political ideology owns. This is why we have in this room Democrats, Republicans, conservatives, progressives, independents here tonight.
Well, what I'm trying to say is that the principles you're talking about are conservative principles, and that has been hidden by the multimedia for years. You are speaking conservative principles, except for climate change.
Thank you. Yes, sir. Yvette.
Planned to do a prayer, Marianne Williamson, who planned to do a prayer meeting at our convention center. The announcement of when that was going to be was the wrong date in our weekly reader. It was said that it was going to be the 26th or something. It was actually a week earlier. And then when it finally came around to the date that they had originally announced, there was no indication that they had been wrong. None. I'm not saying that this is a mistake on the part, that it was intentional on the part of the Weekly Reader. I doubt that it was. But the same forces that are against you were against her.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I've been fascinated by the philosophical, philosophical difference between the left and the right. So the one is individual responsibility, and the other is the need to care for each other. There's an organization called the Better Angels, which is kind of coming up in the country to try to get the two sides to talk to each other and understand where they're coming from. So, interesting observation that I came up with years ago and approached our state legislature was that about 40% of the health costs in our country are caused by what people do to themselves. So, for instance, the obesity epidemic, you know, it's not really a disease you get unless you're a 2-year-old whose parents have been giving you junky food. And so what my suggestion was that we, in our healthcare law, we say if you have a condition that's self-created, whether it's drugs or diet or whatever, we'll let you know that if after 5 years from now you develop something that's related to that or caused by that, we aren't paying for it. What do you feel about that?
So I want to challenge the premise of the two kind of philosophical ideas that you've presented, in that I don't believe it has to be either or. It's both. It's together. It's a balance. And so, you know, let's take what you're talking about. In my home state of Hawaii and in many other communities in the country, diabetes is becoming an increasing problem. I think we have, it's the #1 health issue that folks in our home state are facing. We have a lot of people who are facing obesity and other health issues surrounding that at a very young age, heart conditions and so on and so forth. One of my friends has they have a farm and a plant-based cafe where they grow the food and they get locally sourced food, and they're trying to help inform and educate good eating habits amongst their community. And one of the programs that they've done, again, this is all on their own, they're small business owners, is taken, I don't know what it was, I think the initial group was about 10 people, under the supervision of a doctor, giving them 2 meals free a day and educating and informing them about what healthy living is like, what it consists of, and seeing how that has positively impacted the health challenges that they're facing. And one gentleman that my friend told me about, he was in his 30s and he was very, very overweight and facing a lot of health conditions that someone in their mid-30s really shouldn't be dealing with. He was really appreciating learning about all this. And when they expressed to him, they said, okay, well, you know, after this program is done, make sure you try to eat salad at least once a day. And he said, oh yeah, that's no problem. I already eat salad once a day. I eat my macaroni salad. But he wasn't joking. So when you think about the culture he was brought up in, the kind of food he was fed as a kid, what he understood, like, hey, this is good for me, but it's not. And that kind of awareness that he was learning about, hey, well, maybe I can make these better choices about what I'm putting in my body that will help make it so that this food is actually healing my body rather than further making me sick. So I think there's a combination of an approach that we can take to make sure that those who need care in a system that's truly centered around health care rather than just plying people with drugs when they're sick or putting Band-Aids and short-term solutions on problems that really require a deeper solution, actually focus on people's health care and use our system in a way that both raises that awareness so that people can make better informed choices for themselves, and that incentivizes and helps empower those who maybe have difficulty accessing those. And I visited, for example, communities in Detroit where food deserts are a very real thing. So you can just say, well, make better choices. What's wrong? Just make better choices. Why don't you eat healthier food? But we're talking about communities where there is no health food where they grow up. I've met families who literally their grocery store is the liquor store. That's where they get their food. So this is a much deeper issue that I think we can and should come together as a society to better help empower each other to make these better choices. Again, there are amazing people who are doing these grassroots efforts, who are building these urban farms and vacant lots in their communities, growing food, holding cooking classes, inviting their friends and neighbors over to see, hey, this is how you can make some food right here, selling them at the farmer's market, bringing down the price, making it so it's cheaper. And we can do this. We can contribute to this through our government as well. So we look at WIC funding, for example, a program that's available for women who are either pregnant or who've just given birth to be able to get food. They don't have that much money to be able to get food for themselves and for their baby. But you look at the food that actually qualifies under this program, almost all of it is crap. It's bad for you. Highly processed, high in sugar, things that are actually helping to contribute to so many of these challenges that our kids are seeing from a young age. But this is what is made available to them. If they can't afford anything else, then these formulas and all this other stuff, then this problem is starting at the beginning of their lives. So there's a lot that we can do to make sure that our healthcare system helps empower and enable people to be able to make those better choices for themselves and to help provide care for those who are in need of it. Exactly. Exactly. Making it so that the EBT cards, these food stamps, once again, are made available so that you can take them to the farmer's market and that you can actually get more value out of every one of those dollars when you're making healthier purchases and choices. Those are the kinds of things that we can do to change our system.
Yes. Aloha, Tulsi.
Aloha.
My name is Cheyenne Holiday, and I own a vegan nonprofit community event center and upcoming restaurant just a block away from here in the old Orpheum Theater.
Wow.
And
Yeah, give her a round of applause. That's amazing.
we'd love to host
When is your restaurant going to open?
Hopefully next month. We're all donation-based right now, and I've been personally funding everything the last few months.
Wow.
And so if anyone's interested, I'm right here.
What's it called? Tell us what it's called.
It's called Plant.
All right.
And so, my background, but going back, so this summer, I participated in action.
By the way, let me just say for a moment, you have a great platform and a captive audience. Don't be shy about making your pitch.
Okay,
It's for a good cause.
I'll do that at the end.
All right.
So this summer, I participated in action with a group called Direct Action Everywhere in California. In California, under California Penal Code 597, it's illegal to kill or harm any animal. Now, this law isn't actually enforced. And so as a group, we collected evidence of a certain farm showing that they are practicing criminal animal cruelty, displayed it to the police, local lawmakers, and we said, can you please enforce the law and start an investigation? We got no's all across the board. And so one day, a group of over 500 of us occupied this farm. I was part of a group that chained myself to the front gate, and we were all arrested on felony charges. And I'm currently going to court. I have a case. I'll be going back to California soon, and I could go to prison for this. And additionally, under the Animal Enterprise Terrorism Act, which is a federal act, I'm now classified as a domestic terrorist. Yeah, for saving baby ducks. And so, as our upcoming president, which I would love for you to become, what are your thoughts on this act and on establishing an animal bill of rights that gives every sentient being the right to their own life?
On the California law, I was not aware of that. I'd want to look into it more before I comment on that. I have been, throughout my time in Congress, continuously pushing for a whole host of different animal rights bills to help improve the situation that we are seeing in this country where so many of our animals are being harmed, whether you're talking about household pets, dogs, you're talking about horses and other animals that we have. Look, the conditions that we see in so many of these factory farms are beyond atrocious. The fact that many states have laws that ban any kind of pictures or video in these farms, I think says a lot about what they don't want people who eat those animals and those products to see, about how those animals are ending up on their plates. Look, every single person has the freedom to make their own choices about what they put in their bodies and about the lifestyles that they choose to live. I think that we as a society and in our government can think about how best we can put forward policies that incentivize and help empower people to make smarter and better choices, both for themselves and for our planet. And so those are some of that's the framework that I would look to see. How can we look at the laws that are in place at the federal level, all the way from the FDA to the Farm Bill and so many other key pieces of legislation that we see come around every time that unfortunately further incentivize the harmful systems that are in place that are damaging people's health and damaging our planet, and turn that around.
What about the choice of the animal?
That's a big philosophical argument that we can, and a discussion we should have as a country. I'm speaking to you as someone who has never eaten animals in my life. I've made that choice for myself. Other people make different choices for themselves. I think the more that we can help to elevate the consciousness and awareness around the consequences of these choices, the better off that we will all be.
With the Trump pulling out our troops in Syria, which seems on the face of it a great thing in the direction of getting us out of these endless wars. But I was wondering what you thought of that, thinking about the treatment of our allies and the destabilization and the ability of the president to have so much power that he can take these actions on his own. Yeah. And then another part of it is, I have a discussion with my son, and he says, who is going to be strong enough to stand up to the military industrial complex, the CIA? Well, Donald Trump doesn't have to be strong enough. He can just smash through it and ignore it. Is that a positive thing?
What do you mean by smash through it and ignore it?
The Pentagon didn't know he was doing this. His generals are against it, and yet he's able to do it.
Yeah.
Is that a good thing or a bad thing?
It's a great question. On the first part of your question, I am watching and gathering information about both his decision and what's actually happening on the ground there in Syria right now. So I'm going to hold on my response on that because it's a complex situation. There's a lot more than what is happening at the superficial level, and I'll be making a statement on that very soon. To your son's question about who will have the strength and the courage to stand up to the military-industrial complex, we have seen how presidents in our past, both Democrats and Republicans, have made a lot of promises about bringing our troops home. As Trump said a lot on the campaign trail, he would end stupid wars, that he talked a lot about Saudi Arabia and how they were supporting terrorism and how they were not our allies, but yet when he took office, the total 180, right? Now they're his best friends. You see that he's not followed through on a lot of the promises that he made. And that begs the question, so what is it that happens that makes it so these presidents, once they're elected, don't follow through? That they don't have the courage or the backbone to stand up to the military-industrial complex and the foreign policy establishment? It requires courage. It requires strength. It requires understanding and experience, understanding of our foreign policy and our national security, the ramifications of the decisions that are made. This is what sets me apart not only from Donald Trump, but also from many of the other candidates who are running for president. And it is that understanding and that experience that I bring that enables me to walk into the Oval Office prepared to do that job and prepared to stand up to that influence, to stand up to the pressure that frankly has already been coming from the military-industrial complex, from the foreign policy establishment who, you know, for all of the establishment in Washington who say, you know what, Tulsi Gabbard is a nothing candidate. Her campaign is, you know, she's got zero support. She's nothing, but they spend a lot of time talking about me. And they spend a lot of time perpetrating rumors and smears and saying things that are blatantly false, calling names and so on and so forth, but not actually confronting or challenging or presenting and opposing a view on the changes I'm calling for in our foreign policy. Why is that? They're using the same tactics that we've seen them use over and over and over again. It's like, I mean, it's literally following the playbook. What's the first step? If you see an opponent, the very first, they do this with leaders of other countries. That, you know, when you look at the regime change wars that have happened, usually the first step is discrediting that leader, smearing that leader, saying things about them that undermines them. And this is what we're already seeing. So yes, I have the courage, and I've shown this throughout my record in Congress, that I will not only withstand these smear tactics and attempts, but to stand up to the pressure that we have seen coming from this establishment, coming from the four-star generals who, you know, look back to JFK and how he was being pressured by his own Joint Chiefs of Staff, how previous presidents have been told by their military leaders, do this or else we all resign. We need a leader who has the courage and the backbone and the conviction and understanding to be able to stay focused on our objective, which is not worrying about what the establishment thinks or how they'll respond, or they might say bad things about me in public, or the media might say bad things about me, but instead looking at how these decisions impact our country. How do they impact our servicemen and women? How will they impact us? How will they impact our taxpayer dollars? Does it actually serve the best interest of our country in making this decision or that decision? Having the foresight to see what happens next, to be able to look at the ramifications, not just the ones that come immediately, but as so often happens in these conflicts, we do something, there will be a response. How do we respond to that? What will they do? Then what will we do? You look in the military, we call this the second, third, fourth, fifth order of effects on any action that's taken. This is the kind of foresight that we have lacked for so long and that we have seen has cost us so much, as we still have troops in Iraq, as we still have troops in Afghanistan near now, what, for almost 19 years? This is what sets me apart from the others who are running for president. And this is how I'll defeat Donald Trump in 2020.
Yeah, I just wanted to ask quickly, what's your opinion on Edward Snowden and whether or not he should be allowed to return to the United States?
He was the true, one of the few true whistleblowers that we've seen who exposed so much of abuse of power that we've seen within our own government, and he's dealing with the ramifications of that. And I think if you watched some of the interviews that he did around his book's release, and I haven't read his book at all yet, but The thing that he's asking for is a fair trial. I had the good fortune of being able to meet with Daniel Ellsberg a few months ago in California, and just hearing about his story and learning a lot about how little protection there really is for whistleblowers, and how what Snowden is asking for is the same thing that Ellsberg was denied when he was put to trial for releasing those Pentagon papers. And that is to be able, in that trial, to present your intent. You know, so much of our judicial system, right, it's about what the crime that was committed, but why was it? Why did you do that? The intent is something that's factored in when you're dealing with a jury trial, for example. But under our laws, the Espionage Act, under which Ellsberg was charged and under which Snowden is being charged, the defendant is not allowed to speak to intent. I think that's wrong. That's what Snowden's asking for, and if all he's saying, he wants to come back to the United States, he wants to come home, and he will sit and go through a fair trial, so long as he is allowed to have the same right that every other American is allowed when we are charged with a crime. I think that is something that we must bring about. We're working with some advocacy groups and Daniel Ellsberg right now on seeing what kind of legislation we can introduce to bring about that change in the Espionage Act. Thank you. Yes, sir.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you.
In terms of stopping regime change wars, do you see it as something that as these times come up, or the incidents come up, or the situations come up, sort of stopping them? Or do you see it more as a proactive thing? You just mentioned something about 5 stages of the military, something or other. Would that be involved in terms of stopping them more proactively?
Yeah, it's both. It's both. It's looking at the effects of and the situations that we are currently dealing with, regime change wars that have been begun and waged in the past, the ones that are still ongoing. The regime change war that was begun in Syria in 2011 is continuing to this day. We look at the policies that this administration has put forward as it relates to Iran, Venezuela, and even Cuba. And you can say, well, the war really hasn't begun, right? Because we're not in a conventional conflict with these countries, but phase 1 of a regime change war very often begins with very crippling sanctions that are essentially a modern day siege. And I looked back at like the dictionary definition of what is a siege. When you look back at the old school days where they would block off food and water and medicine from getting into a city, it was to literally kind of strangle the people so that they would eventually rise up against their own government and blame their own government for this situation. And that's exactly the thing that we're seeing. I mean, how long has this been going on in Cuba, right? I mean, the different embargoes and sanctions that have been in place in Cuba for decades with the goal of what? Getting rid of Castro, right? Getting rid of the government there. Did it work? No. What happened as a result? It is the Cuban people who suffered the most. It's the Iranian people who are suffering the most right now under these crippling sanctions. It is the Venezuelan people who are suffering the most right now under these crippling sanctions. So it is ending the existing regime change wars that are still ongoing, and it's making sure that we don't start any new ones. Does that answer your question?
Tackling sort of the context of the whole thing?
Yeah.
I mean, that would have to involve the military-industrial complex too, I would imagine.
Yeah. When you look at tackling the whole context of this, I mean, you can bring up a whole, well, let's bring up fossil fuels and our dependence still on fossil fuels that are coming from the Middle East. So you see that as a contributing factor. So if we're saying, hey, we've got to transition off of fossil fuels, yes, we're talking about preventing further environmental damage, but we're also talking about this from a national security implication, where we no longer will be dependent on what's happening in Saudi Arabia or what's happening in other countries as it relates to our energy security. Even as we look at our prices, you know, this was something that happened when Saudi Arabia's oil supply was blown up. The biggest thing people were worried about here was how is this going to impact our prices at the tank? And you see that kind of economic instability really destabilizing our own economy. Well, imagine if we were not dependent on any foreign fossil fuels. We're not dependent on fossil fuels at all. We have fixed energy costs that we are getting from our own clean renewable energy sources that are not reliant on any external situation. Imagine that, fixed energy costs that are lower than what we're seeing coming out of the fossil fuel industry. So yes, I think there are various factors like that. You know, you can see the economic and trade war with China that's continuing to escalate, another nuclear armed country that's contributing to this new Cold War, and how an economic war can very quickly turn to a hot war and the dangerous consequences that come with that. So it is approaching this from a comprehensive perspective, dealing with completely changing our foreign policy away from being the world's police, stop that, and actually engage with the world, engage with leaders of other countries with this foreign policy of cooperation rather than conflict. Leading in being a force for good in the world, rather than running around the world with this baton of bullying people. Leading with Aloha. Imagine that, leading with Aloha. Yes, ma'am.
Hi. I'm coming. Sorry. Thanks. Okay, so I have to, because that's just how I process things. So, Montserrat, so I have a question.
You don't have to go back.
Sorry.
You're good.
I like my corners. I'm used to standing on
All
soapboxes. So, I want to go back to this Medicare thing. And I kind of want to connect it to another thing. So, I've heard you talk about your plan for Medicare and this like opt-in, and great, that sounds fantastic. But as I've been kind of processing things, I recognize a lot of my support of it was definitely coming from a very like American privileged place, right? So then I realized there's like millions of people who are undocumented who do need health care. And what's gonna happen with that? Because I've also heard you say that you're trying to prioritize American needs, which I'm all for and I fully support. But then I started thinking, okay, what about the needs of members of my family, or needs of workers and people that I serve, that I help, who are undocumented but are employees, who are being paid under the table, who have these healthcare needs as well, but everyone is kind of, let's pretend they don't exist and let's prioritize this other group of people. And I fall into that line of thinking as well. And then it hit me one day, like there are some folks who are really old, who are undocumented, working in terrible conditions, and they can't retire, not only because they need the income, but because that employer was kind enough to offer some sort of health care, and now they're stuck there, so they're working in atrocious conditions, they're being underpaid, and they're kind of in this cycle. And my questioning starts to go into, well, what happens to that spirit of aloha to them? Are they not brothers and sisters, mothers, fathers, siblings either? You know, how much are we going to pretend like folks don't exist to fix the problem at home, recognizing that there are millions of people who are making this home the home that we're seeing it on the surface level, right? So what's gonna happen with the undocumented folks in this country who are making America great, who are serving in a way as slaves to this country currently, and we keep acting like they're not here because there's a slew of other issues that we need to prioritize?
Thank you. Well, we start by stopping this invisibility, stopping this turning our backs on those who are living in the shadows, the people who you're talking about, people who are undocumented, people who are working, dreamers and others, people who've been here for many, many years but have never made that transition to any kind of legal residency or citizenship. We've got to stop pretending like this doesn't exist. And this is what I've talked about many times before, that as we're talking about the changes that we need to see in healthcare and education and so many aspects and parts of our lives, we have to also solve the broken immigration system that exists in this country. To me, the answer is not just to put Band-Aids on the problem. We have to actually fix the root cause of the problem to make it so that these people can come out, our brothers and sisters can come out of the shadows, don't have to live in fear of deportation. We fix our broken immigration system, which deals with the crisis that's happening at the border, but also our broken legal immigration system that makes it very difficult, if not impossible, for those who have been here, who are already here, who've been here for a long time, contributing to our society and our economy, from actually getting those legal documents, from pursuing whether it's a path to citizenship or legal residency. Our system is not serving them right now. It's not serving our society and the social systems that we have in place. And it's not serving the best interests of our country to continue with this status quo. So I would reach across the aisle to work with Republicans, a lot of who I hear from here in this state of Iowa, who are those employers and who are concerned about if their workers are deported, then their business shuts down. There's more bipartisan concern and interest around these issues than I think often is given credit for in Washington. There are many different components to this, but we have to be able to make sure that we fix our legal immigration system, that we provide that path to citizenship, that we finally pass a clean DREAM Act to end the uncertainty that so many of our DACA recipients have been facing for so long, that we actually fix and plug these holes to make it possible so that every one of those people who are living in the shadows can actually come out and live free of fear. Yes, ma'am. Yep.
As we start to kind of fix all of these other areas, I think my question is really, are you going to consider those folks who exist in those areas, who exist in education, who are being recruited into the military with the promise of being being given papers? You know, I did see that in my community, like post 9/11, boom, hey, you guys want papers? Sign up, right? So like we exist at these very different levels across this entire American system. So as we're overhauling each of those systems, are those people going to be included in that instead of excluded into, it's just an immigration issue?
It's not just an immigration issue. That's my whole point, that these things don't happen in silos and one thing doesn't connect to another, doesn't connect to another. They're all very much interconnected. And it's not saying, well, we tackle one first and leave the other one until the very end of the list. All of these issues are interconnected. We have to be able to do more than one thing at a time. I have people who I served with who've been denied their citizenship, people who put their lives on the line for our country, who've been unable to get the citizenship that they thought that they were promised when they joined the military. We're seeing veterans who are being deported after they've deployed maybe once, twice, even 3 times serving our country, denied the benefits that they've earned through our government. So I'm not at all saying that, well, this immigration piece is just one piece. All of these issues are very much interconnected, and they require comprehensive reform and not just continuing to see the kind of reactive leadership, if you want to call it leadership, that we've seen for so long, where you put a Band-Aid on an issue and then you move on to the next headline of the day and the next headline of the day. But meanwhile, people are left behind and they're left suffering as a result. Yes, ma'am.
There are so many issues that it's kind of hard to pick one. But one thing I haven't heard anybody address is the fact that our national debt is approaching $23 trillion. And I would like to know what your plan would be to deal with that. And it's getting worse every day.
It is. It is. This is something that we have seen continuing over time. One that often is pointed when the partisan interests serve it, they point at the other team and say it's your fault. When the winds shift the other way, they say, well, it's your fault. When really this is an issue that will continue to impact so many generations and who will actually pay the price for this. So I'll go back to something we talked about a little bit earlier about how do we pay for things? This matters. Where are taxpayer dollars going? This matters. What kind of cuts and waste and abuse that exists within every one of our federal agencies that needs to be addressed. Now, we hear stories every now and then when the Inspector General goes or OPM or these other agencies go and do these reviews and audits, and you'll hear about a $500 mug or a $1,000 screw. When you look at how it's possible that these things can occur, you get down to the reforms that we need in our procurement laws, the reforms that are needed in our contracting laws, and the oversight and accountability to make sure that our federal agencies are being audited, not only in how are our dollars being spent in the ways that the waste and abuse that I'm talking about, but are the programs that are in place actually working? Are they actually achieving the intended objective? And I can tell you one thing I've seen is that too often a program that was begun maybe a long time ago was put in place and maybe serves an interest group of people, even when the need goes away, which ideally is the goal, right? You put these resources towards a problem in the hopes that you're able to solve the problem and then move on to the next one. But then it just becomes perpetuated, and the program exists to make sure that the program can continue to exist, rather than just actually asking the question, saying, well, is this actually needed? Or do we need something different? If the problem still exists and this program hasn't solved it, maybe we need to take a different approach. Taking a very critical look at how our taxpayer dollars are spent and approaching this with the responsibility that we all should, as we would if it was our own money being spent, and being careful and making sure those dollars are actually serving the needs of our people.
We also know that over, I think, about 60 Fortune 500 companies this past year that made billions of dollars did not pay any.
Exactly.
And,
No, that's a critical part of this. I'm glad you brought that up. And our tax code and how unfair it is and how it's benefiting the rich and powerful, and how as all of us go through and we pay our taxes every year, those who are making the most, who have the most, somehow magically get away without paying anything at all. This is the consequence of a government of, by, and for the rich and powerful, and this is a key component of how we change these policies, both to figure out how do we pay for things, which includes bringing down our debt.
Last question.
I'll go to you in the back, the hat.
Oh, thank you. I just want to get your views on what's called the third rail of American politics. You got guys like Greenspan saying it's an entitlement program, Social Security. And also guys like Mitch McConnell saying, well, it's an entitlement program, we need to cut it. So what is the groundworks in the Congress these days as far as Social Security, protecting it, improving it? Do you have any views on that?
I do. I have some pretty strong views on this.
Good.
First of all, I disagree that it's an entitlement. It's an earned benefit. Every one of us pays into this out of every single paycheck that we earn throughout our entire lives, in the hopes that this will be a benefit that we can use at the time that we need it most in our lives. Maybe hopefully when we stop working or we're working a little bit less. So, just the messaging and the framing around this saying, well, it's an entitlement, It's not something that you deserve, that you've got to earn it. Well, we have earned it. We've paid into it, and we deserve to know it'll be there when we need it most. We have to not only preserve it in the hopes that, you know, my generation will be able to tap into it when we're ready to, but I believe that we need to expand the benefit. Because we're seeing, and I hear from people almost every day out on this campaign trail, people who are struggling just to be able to put a roof over their head, put food on their table, and get the medicine they need with this Social Security benefit, with rising costs of housing, rising costs of healthcare, the rising cost of living, that the amount of this Social Security benefit is not even beginning to meet those needs that exist. So we should look at not only preserving, but expanding it, and I think there's two big things that we can do. I think there's a number of other things, but the two main things I want to talk about are putting into law a prohibition of raiding the Social Security fund to pay for anything other than Social Security. Shockingly, this is something that still comes up as people put legislation forward and saying, you know, when we offer an amendment to an appropriations bill, and we say, okay, well, we want to fund this new program or put more funding into an existing program. One of the rules is you've got to take those dollars from an existing program. And it just shocks me still that people look to the Social Security fund as a pay-for some other program that has nothing to do with Social Security. So that's number one. Number two, I think we've got to lift the cap. We've got to lift the cap so that, you know, what is it now? It's like $127,000, 117. I think it's 117 if I'm not mistaken. And so those who make above that amount of money, they don't pay Social Security tax on any of that. So what does that mean? It's not the working middle class who will be impacted by this. It's those who are, you know, in the top tier, those who are in the 1%, those who are making a lot more money who will be impacted by this, who will be contributing more towards their own Social Security and all of ours. Good. We'll take this one last one here. Yes, ma'am. I've been looking at your girls there, and I was hoping one of you might ask a question.
This is partly for her.
All right.
Yeah, she's 10, so she doesn't want to say it. So I work as a food consultant in the organic sector and non-GMO. I also do a lot of volunteer work, but the long story short is corporations are still controlling what the kids eat at school every day, as you probably know. And even the education they're getting is underwritten by Monsanto. This year I was forced to take the school lesson that they were taught in 4th grade, 5th grade, source the material and find out that that's where it's being purchased from. It's being written by the corporations to teach on a base level what to eat, when to eat it, how to eat it, and how much to eat. And so I feel like we didn't talk much about education tonight because it kind of feels small compared to all these other global issues. But the truth is that not everybody can stick their kids in private school. And I know because I have 4 kids, and some of them were lucky enough to go to one. But the public school system is a mess, and it's underfunded, and they're raising bake sales when, honestly, the military has more money than it knows what to do with. So that's what concerns me, on top of all the other totally valid and concerning issues. So.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I share your concern about how our education system is often talked about, but when it comes to the action points, it's an afterthought. We talked about this a little bit earlier before about how that priority and the way we view education in this country needs to change. But I think the first point that you brought up is really important because it actually goes to the deeper rooted issue of the corruption in our government and how these massive corporations can purchase their way into almost every aspect of our lives, to include our kids' education and to include influencing the nutrition guidance that's put out by the FDA, to include the policies that are included in the Farm Bill every year. So rooting out this corruption in our government, I think, is central to our ability to extract this big influence that they have, including what you brought up with regards to GMO. Getting rid of the big special interest money in politics is essential. making it so that we set the standard for every one of our elected officials, that they will not accept PAC or lobbyist money, taking that influence out of it. Closing the revolving door in our own government, where in so many different sectors you have people who are in positions as regulators, who are in positions of oversight, who have just come from the industry that they are now charged to hold accountable, which includes people coming from Monsanto and working within our government, which includes people who worked for the big banks on Wall Street and then going and being appointed to positions in the SEC, which includes Ajit Pai, who came from working for Verizon as an executive and then being the chair of the FCC, which includes people who worked in the Pentagon writing up contracts for big military defense contractors to the tune of billions of dollars, and then going and working for the very contractors that they just wrote the contract for. To include examples within our healthcare industry, within our education system, in our agriculture. There's so many different examples. We've got to close this revolving door that leads to this corrosive and corruptive influence that impacts us in so many ways in our everyday lives. I'm working on legislation now in Congress to start to deal with these elements of legal corruption that exist within our own government, to take away their big influence and actually make it so that when we're focusing on passing policies, that we're having substantive debate around what impact those policies actually have on people rather than the corporations who are funding the politicians advocating for them. That's a debate in the country we need to have. Term limits. These questions about term limits. Now let's close on this. Y'all have been very patient. You've been here a long time. I think term limits, we've got to have this debate as a country. I think there's some validity to that, absolutely. That's very much tied to how so many of the incumbents that exist in Washington are fueled by PAC contributions that come from lobbyists, and they don't even go out and try to get contributions from actual individual people and grassroots supporters. There are some states that have passed term limit laws that I think have been too short, to the point where rather than holding the elected official accountable, the people who the lobbyists will then go and try to influence and talk to are the chiefs of staff or the bureaucrats within the government who are not accountable. They're not elected by the people, but they're the ones who are providing advice and opinions to those elected officials who may be only there for 1 term or 2 terms, leaving the people like, where do you go in that situation? So I think it is an important debate that our country needs to have to decide what exactly should those term limits be to make sure that there's not an unintended negative consequence. Thank you. Thank you all so much. Thank you for your time. Thank you. Thank you. Brief closing comments. The next debate is October 15th. This is a week from tomorrow, I believe, Tuesday. I will be there. Debate or no debate, I am focused on bringing our message to voters here in Iowa and all across the country so that we can continue to grow and build our people-powered movement. I want to ask for every single one of you for your support and your help in enabling us to be able to do that, both through telling everybody that you know why they should come and join us in this movement, and if you can make a contribution to our campaign, I hope you consider doing so. Tulsi2020.com, and our volunteers are in the back if you'd like to help sign up. Thank you so much.
Can I? Hi, everybody. Aloha. Can I have everyone's attention, please? Thank you, sir. Hi. How many of you are motivated, inspired by Tulsi's talk today? Woo! Thank you. So if you've, we're going to have a coffee and toffee event tomorrow morning from 9 to 10:30. Do any of you know the story about Tulsi and toffee in Congress? Yeah.
If you don't know, you're going to have to come back tomorrow morning to learn it.
So if you've signed up, when you checked in with us today, if you signed up to volunteer today, if you've signed up to volunteer, or if you'd like to come to the coffee and toffee, You'll need to sign up to volunteer, and we will send you an email tonight with the details of where it is, and you could discuss with Tulsi on ways you could help her on this movement. So please join us tomorrow morning, and if you want to, you know what to do now, right? And if you'd like a picture with Tulsi, we can do that, but you have to, we're running half an hour behind schedule, and we have to be out of here like pronto. So you have to promise me that you will literally have your phone ready, no questions, no comments, get up here, snap, and out. Are you gonna promise me that? Yay, thank you. Here's how we're gonna do it. Everyone's,
Go ahead.
sorry. We're gonna have you line up on this side, okay, can you see me? On your right. Sorry, that's your left. And then you're gonna single file line up. You're gonna come on the stage, snap a picture, and out on this side, okay? So let's keep it clear, and so there's no congestion. And I think Tulsi wanted to say something.
Thank you. As you guys are lining up, I just wanted to ask for your help in giving a round of thanks and applause to our audio guy, Steve, who is there in the back.